Hello, and welcome to another edition of Focus. I'm your host, Vernon L. Bowling. 40 years, almost. We're almost close to 40 years. To be exact, about 38 years. We've been presenting you Focus. We've been talking to various community leaders. We've been talking about different events. You name it, we've talked about it that affect the African American community. And for all those 40 years, there's only been a few people who've been connected with Focus. And every now and then you'll hear me talk about Tony. Well, he's very, very important towards the show, getting it on the air, edited, shooting it, and doing everything else. And myself, who's been hosting it. But from time to time, we try to have other people who come on and show a little interest in doing it. One of those such persons is Fatimah Halim. Fatimah is a household word in the Valley, Afrocentric, very connected to the community, and a lot of you know her. She's going to be presenting shows, and she's going to be still bring you things that affect the African American community. So please, don't touch the remote. We're going to be trying to stay up with the times. This and more when Focus continues.
My husband was deployed in October of 2009.
After he left, everything just felt like it sank.
Just didn't really like life at the time.
The hardest thing was just trying to figure out a new routine.
When you're a military family, things like the arts really are extra here at ASU Gamage. The Arizona Lottery enables 200 military dependents to come to the theater 3 times a year. This is our way of saying thank you, and we can never say thank you enough.
My winning streak in life didn't begin with a ranch I'd always imagined. It didn't begin when I bought my very first horse, or with a 10-gallon hat I was thirsting for. It began with a hope and a dream, and of course, that wonderful winning ticket. The Arizona Lottery. You can't win if you don't play.
Welcome back to Focus. I'm Fatimah Halim, and we're in the offices of Phoenix Professional Practices Associates talking about mental health. Joining me on this part of the show is Dr. Andrea Pratt, who is one of the associates here. And thank you for joining us. Thank you, Vernon. Today we're going to tackle a topic that many of us in the Black community keeps hush-hush. And as a result of us being hush-hush, we have some very, very serious issues that we really need to begin to address. The topic is mental health. I'm here in the offices of Dr. Buffy Wooten, Dr. Andrea Pratt, Celeste Spain, who is a licensed counselor, and other doctors who practice here. And we're going to be talking today about that topic, and hopefully there'll be some information that you can get from this that might be able to help you and your family. With me today is Marcus Sanchez. Marcus had some issues with mental health in his own life, and he is gracious enough to come on and talk about it with us. So welcome, Marcus, and thank you. Marcus, tell us a little bit about what challenges you faced in terms of mental health.
In the past, I didn't know what was happening to me. I would find myself feeling very bluesy, like that, watching a movie or something like that, all of a sudden I feel like crying when normally I wouldn't. I would have what they call a transference of what was happening in that particular scene, and I would sometimes relate to it. But there were times when, as I was growing up, I realized that there was something wrong, because I kind of was a highly maintainable child.
So the mental health issue that you dealt with was depression.
Yes.
So when did you first realize, you said that when you were a child, that you were a high maintenance type of child.
Right, that's what I remember.
What do you mean? Because all
I always
kids
used to get
be
in
a high
trouble.
maintenance.
I always used to get into trouble.
But that's not necessarily a symptom of mental health.
This is true. I used to do things that got me in serious trouble.
Like,
And getting caught shoplifting or
that's mental health.
well,
Because then I'm crazy.
well, that's how my family looked at me.
I see.
Okay, they felt something was wrong with me, and the more they labeled me as a problem child,
I see.
you see what I'm saying, and it grew from there.
You began to believe it.
I began to believe it, and actually, I was just a very unruly kid. But I'm okay now. But I knew that I had a lot of obstacles in my family because everybody was trying to make themselves look better by making me look like the one who had the problem.
So at a very early age, did you believe you had a problem?
Yes,
And what was the problem you thought you had?
I thought that I just couldn't behave, no matter what. No.
And so what happened as a result of that? What did you?
A lot of being grounded, and it wasn't so much of a physical thing, being hit or anything like that. It was more verbal, and looking back on it now, it was demeaning to me. I felt out of place even at family gatherings. So that was, I think, was the root of it. And as I got older, I became more and more aggressive, and then again I would retreat into my own self.
So when did you realize that it was depression?
After,
Or who told you that? Who told you that what you were experiencing was depression?
let me think now, it was probably in my adult years, like by the time I had gotten married, it was not a good marriage. I began to just leave just to escape from the responsibilities of a father and a newlywed. And I would just escape and just not be found until I wanted to be found or come back. And I always felt that I couldn't measure up to anything that I thought I was supposed to do.
And how did that make you feel?
Very much alone, afraid, frustrated, angry at myself at times, but never to harm myself physically.
So you never had any feelings of any suicidal feelings
No,
or anything
no,
ever?
no.
So,
No.
so when you went on these bouts of going away from your family and not coming back for what, days at a time?
Yeah, I was known as a wanderer in my childhood. After I got married, I still had that trait, but in a more adult way, I would just go off for a couple of days.
Where would you go?
Another girlfriend's house, perhaps, to
Okay.
escape from what was really the root of why I was running. I was running from responsibility, and I realized that I got married for the wrong reasons, and that even upset me even more. I felt like I had trapped myself.
Okay. And so that made you feel, now, I'm trying to see where the depression came in and how did that manifest itself? Because you running off to a girlfriend's house sounds like regular behavior. I mean, you know, that doesn't sound like it's a mental health problem, unless it is, and then there we have that problem that we need to fix.
I was running from the responsibilities that was expected of me.
Okay.
And I knew at that point I wasn't ready for responsibility as much as I thought. And that made me even sadder and feel
I got you.
inadequate. That's the word. I felt inadequate.
So you went when you went to the other woman's house, it made you feel better?
It was liberation
Okay.
from what I came from.
Okay, so could it have been a really good excuse to go there?
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not
It's
going
just,
to rule that out, but the root of it is that I had a lot of lack of self-esteem.
So who told you, or when did you begin to realize that it was what you were experiencing, because you were feeling bad, you were feeling bluesy, you said earlier.
After I came home from the service in '68, I was a young man, 21 years old, ready for the world, but I had a few goals that were not accomplished before I went into the service, because I was truant. So I had to go into the Army at 17 or otherwise go to reform school. Back then was Elmira.
I remember all
You
that.
remember
Yeah,
Elmira?
I do.
And so I was given a choice: have your parents sign you up into the Army or face the course and go upstate.
Of course, now that was during Vietnam.
Yes, that was in '65 when, February '65, when the principal called me into his office and told me that I was being expelled. And
So prior to that, you were just this regular kid who was just unruly and curious and
yes.
wanted to see the life around the block.
Right.
And then you grew up and you went to Vietnam, and they considered it like you were a bad kid.
Well, I didn't go to Nam. I went the other way. I went to Europe.
Oh, okay. So you went to Europe. So when you came out of, so you didn't fight necessarily.
Not
you
necessarily.
You weren't
It was
in
the
combat.
Cold War. It was the
Okay.
Cold War, what we were facing in Germany.
Okay, so when you came back from the service, that's when, and you were 21, that's when you realized that what you were experiencing.
Yeah.
Oh,
It
you
hit me
became
hard.
depressed. You became
Yes,
depressed.
very much.
How, when you say it hit you hard, how?
Because, okay, I had to come back home. I got my high school diploma in the Army, but I wasn't satisfied with it because all my friends, my peers, were in college or either onto a job that basically that was going to be their career, like training manager for Sears and Roebucks, or something that was a career ladder, AT&T in White Plains, New York. IBM was beginning to grow back then, and I couldn't get in because I didn't have what it took. I didn't have the...
You weren't qualified.
I wasn't qualified. So I was fine. I was frustrated and sometimes disgusted, and I went to see one of my former teachers who, I had a lot of teachers who were my friend, and this one teacher who became principal by the time I got out of the Army, he said, why don't you take the New York State GED? Now, that boosted my ego because I knew then someone was interested in my future, because I wasn't getting it at home.
So at 21 or slightly thereafter, you felt as if you were slipping into a depression, because that's really what I want to get to.
I was.
And how were you? Did you stay home? Did you stay in the bed? Did you not talk to anybody? Did you?
I went a lot of places alone. I was always the kind of person who wanted to please everybody because I wanted to be looked upon differently than I had been, more successful.
So now you're married. You married someone because out of honor. You were an honorable man, and you felt that the best route would be to marry this woman that you impregnated.
Right.
You got married. Both of you had challenges because you were still very young, I would think.
Yes.
And so now you went into a state of depression.
Yes.
Okay. And I need to know probably more about depression, because so far I'm not getting it.
There's so many things that led up to, because by the time I started going to the Veterans Administration Hospital, after the marriage counseling did not work, and I was still leaving the household, and I finally was talked into going to see someone, a professional at the VA hospital, and I was very scared to admit it. And after talking several visits, he told me that, yes, you have major depression.
So he defined it.
He defined it for me.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well.
I'm sorry it took so long to tell you that.
It didn't. You know, I'm just trying to figure it out myself, and I think that we'll get a little bit more answers to questions that I have when we come back with Dr. Andrea Pratt from Phoenix Professionals.
My husband was deployed in October of 2009.
After he left, everything just felt like it sank.
Just didn't really like life at the time.
The hardest thing was just trying to figure out a new routine.
When you're a military family, things like the arts really are extra here at ASU Gamage. The Arizona Lottery enables 200 military dependents to come to the theater 3 times a year. This is our way of saying thank you, and we can never say thank you enough.
What's wrong, Mrs. Jenkins? Come on, you can tell me.
Well, there's no funding for the new reading program, and I've tried everything. It's just not fair.
Where can adults go for ideas when they feel as frustrated as kids? ConnectForKids.org, guidance for grown-ups.
My winning streak in life didn't begin with a ranch I'd always imagined. It didn't begin when I bought my very first horse, or with a 10-gallon hat I was thirsting for. It began with a hope and a dream, and of course, that wonderful winning ticket. The Arizona Lottery. You can't win if you don't play.
Welcome back to Focus. I'm Fatimah Halim, and we're in the offices of Phoenix Professional Practices Associates talking about mental health. Joining me on this part of the show is Dr. Andrea Pratt, who is one of the associates here. And thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
We had a brief conversation with Marcus Sanchez, and he was giving us some insight as to what led him into his depression. And I wasn't really getting it because it sounded like regular stuff to me. Does that mean I'm depressed? You know, and I know that there are different levels of depression. I know that there is very deep depression where people do feel suicidal because Mr. Sanchez said that he didn't feel suicidal. And then there was those depressions like he said, where he just felt alone and he just wanted to be by himself. And he didn't feel as if he wanted to assume responsibilities. And that led to other things, including him having an affair or another family somewhere else. So how do you define depression and what do we look for?
Well, I think that depression at different ages can look very different. I think we often imagine that depression looks like the crying and the complete sadness, but oftentimes it can look different in different people. So in adolescence, it could look like rebellion or aggression or aggravation. It could be easy mood shifts where people are irritable or easily frustrated, and it may not have the sadness component to it. But for a lot of people, depression is isolation, alienation, sadness, a shift from regular routine to routine that is not typical. So for example, if they spend a lot of time with friends usually, they may not do that as often, may spend time alone. So lack of interest in usual activities, and that's most of the time or more times than not.
So what does one do when it's determined that they're depressed, or when someone who they're with may just make the assumption that they're depressed, or see them, and based on what the symptoms are that you just gave, what would a family member do? What is the best approach to dealing with someone with depression? And I just wanted to mention, because we just recently lost Robin Williams, who everyone really loved him with his humor, and no one knew he was depressed. It was the tears of the clown, per se. And but what does a family member do when they determine or when they think that their person is depressed?
Well, I think one of the first things to do is to acknowledge to the person that you notice that something is different, and to try to gauge from that person how you can be helpful. And so in the instance where you may notice that somebody is sad, or you think that they're sad, asking about that, giving the message that it's okay if you are. Oftentimes in the African American community, mental illness is so stigmatized that we are not often okay if people present that they have those symptoms. So just acknowledging for people and sitting with them in the sadness or whatever the mood is, and letting them know that you're available could be the first thing that you do.
And what if you're the person that's helping push them into the depression? I mean, really, because one of the things that that Mr. Sanchez mentioned was that his first wife had her own set of issues, which I'm sure didn't help him any while he was going through what he was going through. You know, so here you got two people in a household who are suffering from some form of mental illness, it seems, and one can't help the other. So now what?
Well, I think at some level he might have recognized that she had things going on, and he might have recognized, or she might have recognized, that he also had things going on, and just putting that out there on the table. Okay. You may have your own things that you're dealing with that exacerbate mine, but what do we need to do? Can we be there for one another through this, or might we need to reach out and get help from a professional?
Which is where you come in, where they would come and see you or Dr. Wooten or Celeste, and then you would help them through that process, work through it. Now there's another mental illnesses in our community that really is going undiscussed, and probably even undiagnosed, or certainly we're not talking about it, and that's bipolar. Give me a little insight on that, because I think the more people suffer from bipolar illness, I don't know what the technical term is, than we would ever really believe. And sometimes we just think that someone is just being aggressive or assertive or going from one extreme to another in terms of emotions, and we can't really put our finger on what it really is.
Bipolar disorder is a diagnosis that explains when people tend to exist at opposite poles. So hence you get the bipolar. Most of the time unipolar is referring to a depression because it's only one end of the spectrum. But people who suffer from bipolar disorder are tending to experience extreme behaviors at both ends of the scale. So on one end of the scale you have the depression or the sadness, and the other end of that valence is an elevation or an increase in mood. So oftentimes people are saying, oh, my mood shifts and I have all these mood swings. It's not necessarily a swing from sadness to happiness, which is what most people think, but it's often a shift between depression, which is a diminished energy level or a lack of interest, to extreme energy, where people may not need to eat or sleep for days at a time, where they may imagine that they've discovered the ills of society or major questions as it regards the human race. So it's really an exaggerated sense of existence and energy that is opposite from the depressed, debased energy that people often have.
Now, in bipolar disorder, it can manifest itself, that excitement that you referred to could also manifest itself as rage, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely,
Often.
it could. It could manifest itself as rage. It could also manifest itself as high energy that looks like the person not needing to sleep for days at a time because they have so much energy. And or it could look like highly sexualized behavior, where people are out and they are engaging in promiscuous activity. They may be spending excessively out of that high energy and thought that they can conquer or overcome.
And even when talking to Mrs. Sanchez, you know, was that something that the doctor told you? Because,
right.
You know, because they just make this assumption, because here you are, African-American man who's just wanting to be alone, who don't want to assume his responsibilities for whatever reasons. But is that a reason to call you ill, to call you depressed, or was it depression? And it could have been, and I don't know, only he would really know that. But
I think another barrier is ethnic dissimilarity. I think that sometimes people look for ethnic similarity in their providers because there is that belief that there are some things I don't have to explain or that won't be pathologized if they're heard by another person of color. They might be able to cut through that and actually help me understand if there is really illness here.
You, very briefly, because we have to sum this up, you have an event coming up that might be of benefit to our community.
Yes.
What's happening?
The event that we are doing through Phoenix Professional Practice Associates is we're doing our second annual conference, and it is our Christian conference where we have married Christianity and religion with psychology, because oftentimes people of color tend to turn to religion and tend to believe that if they see a mental health provider, it means that they have rejected their beliefs or their religious beliefs. And we have created a marriage of those two to help people recognize that just because you attend church and have faith, you don't lose that just because you go and see a psychologist or a mental health provider.
So when is this?
The event is October the 4th, Saturday, and it's at the Hilton Garden Inn at the Phoenix Airport area.
Okay,
and
great.
so that's from 8 to 3 on Saturday,
And
October the
you
4th.
and Dr. Wooten and the other doctors who practice here, as well as the other licensed professionals, Celeste Spain and the others, you're available to our brothers and sisters and everybody.
Yes.
Anyone
Yes.
who would like to talk to you, if they even think that they have a mental health problem.
Yes.
You will help them to work through that. If they do, and if they don't, you
Absolutely.
let them know, no, you're just regular crazy.
Yes.
Not crazy.
Yeah, not crazy. And so we do like to pathologize as little as possible, because sometimes it doesn't merit that. And so we do see people here at all levels of issues, and it's not always a Christian bent to the therapy. This particular conference is, but we are
So
available.
your therapy is not Christian based. It's just it's psychology based.
It is psychology based,
Right.
but we have that arm to the treatment. And whatever are people's religious orientations, we incorporate that as they feel they want that,
And if
or
they
don't.
Right, or if they don't.
Or
right.
if they don't.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Pratt. I'm quite sure that the information that you provided will be very helpful to our community, and hopefully people will come here to see both you and the other doctors that are here. Thank you for joining us on Focus, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the show today. Fatimah Halim did a great job, and we want to thank her guests as always. And speaking of always, if you'd like to communicate with us, you can still write to us at Focus, P.O. Box 33697, Phoenix, Arizona 85067. Or if you'd like to email us, please email to us at the address that's on the screen. I hope you got all that information off the screen. As always, we want to thank you for joining us today. I know we're going to be back next week with more informative information on Focus. On behalf of Fatimah Halim, Tony Escobar, and myself, Vernon L. Bowling, we want to thank you for joining Focus this week. Look for us next week, same time, same station, when Focus continues.
With me today. I was going so good. Oh my God. Who are you anyway?
Who are you?